picking on Will and booted him off, but quickly reinstated him after mass outrage. Hopefully, you're laughing at that, Will. Welcome, Ed. Good to see you. And awesome. Well, good. Why don't we slowly just start our day? Maybe we'll just, I'd love to do a quick round of gratitudes actually with our speakers here to start to bring us into the field before we dig into a whole bunch of juicy things. Regenerative DAOs, it's the Alpha Gitcoin round. Regen Ledger 5.0 is up and running. So all kinds of stuff happening. But maybe I'll start with you, Austin. What are you grateful for today? What's moving you?
Good question. I'll do two things. I'm having a Lunar New Year party on Saturday with my partner. It's a huge holiday in the Chinese calendar, East Asian calendar more broadly, and we're going to cook up a bunch of really good food. I'm stoked about that. And I'm also thankful for this really tasty tea that I'm drinking that Will Zoll here on the call sent me for Christmas. That's really smoky and delicious. Rainy outside, feeling the love.
Sounds wonderful. Will's all teas sounds great. Ryan, gratitude from Seattle.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. There's lots to be grateful for, especially in the start of a new year, the energy and excitement around what people are hoping to accomplish this year. I mean, immediately I'm kind of just thinking in terms of work at Regen Network and the community support and the validator community supporting the upgrade to 5.0, which is something that we're going to talk about a little bit today. And just very grateful for everyone continuing to support the Regen mission and the refi community, and also kind of shout out to our science team and registry team. There's a lot of pieces moving in relation to kind of the push to decentralize the registry and integrate kind of some of this new DAO functionality. And a lot of people are just leaning in and having very important discussions around what that might look like. So I'm just grateful for Regen Network team and community.
That's wonderful. Love it. Pranav, greetings from India. Give me grateful for what's moving for you today.
Well, my day has been just Gitcoin, just reaching out to communities. I just feel all the love that everybody has, and everybody is in this very good nature, just cheering each other on and sharing the latest updates on their projects. I think Gitcoin literally just makes us do a sprint, right, from one Gitcoin round to the other. So they're just timing it for us. It's been amazing just listening to everybody's work over the last couple of months. So yeah, I'm grateful for that. Grateful to be in this space and to have this opportunity and to be in the company of folks like everybody on the call. Thank you.
Yes. Thank you, Pranav. Wonderful. Well, good. And I know we've got some other folks coming up to stage, but why don't we start diving in, take advantage of our time together. I was thinking about starting with Austin. I know regenerative, you were up, I think one of your topics is going to be regenerative DAOs, but obviously Regen Foundation also has a project up on Gitcoin's alpha round. Yeah, maybe just give us a more broadly, just how things are moving for you over at the foundation and what's happening, what we should be focusing our attention on today.
Yeah, totally. Hi, everybody. I'm Austin. Hasn't really been formally announced yet, but I'm the executive director of the Regen Foundation. If you don't know who I am, that's the nonprofit arm. Regen Foundation is the nonprofit arm of the larger Regen network. And there's a lot I could say about what we do and what we're focusing on, but I'm here joined by my esteemed colleague, Shyla, AKA Captain Obvious. I think that's your handle. Yeah, saying hi. To talk about what's moving and shaking in the Regen Foundation space and in the sort of DAO space related to Gitcoin. So I think I'll just start by passing the ball to Shyla, who's our really point of contact for developing this Gitcoin Alpha round grant. And Shyla, maybe you can introduce yourself, obviously, but also the sort of what the grant is and what it's about. And then we'll use that as an opportunity to sort of unpack some other bigger questions and see where it goes. But let's start with the specifics, perhaps, of like what this is and who better to talk about it than you, Shai?
Thank you, Austin. I'm happy to be here. Hi, everyone. I see some familiar faces, some people I don't know. Thank you all for inviting me. My name is Shaila Aga. I'm currently sitting in Nairobi, Kenya, and I'm working with Austin at the Regen Foundation, and we have a really exciting project that we're trying to fundraise on Gitcoin, on this Gitcoin round, and it's about the Chama DAO. Now, I think I have to introduce the Chama so that people can understand what a Chama is. And Chamas have basically existed since the 70s as a response to inaccessible credit. And it kind of started out as these just village women groups that would get together on market days and started saving a little bit of money. And they usually started out as like agricultural kind of groups. So they'd all put some money together, buy some seeds, buy some manure, and then start farming that way. And then it turned into, years later, this very complex financing mechanism that has existed. And actually, there's a statistic out there that says 2 out of 3 Kenyans are participating in either one or two chamas. So it's kind of like a really interesting mechanism that has all these interesting governance structures with it too. And I've been fascinated with chamas for like the last 10 years, ever since I found out about them. And it was funny because when I found out about DAOs, I was like, oh, wait, but that's what a chama is. It's just a very analog kind of way. So with the chama, kind of everyone contributes, but you contribute the amount that you can. And it's kind of kept on this actual physical ledger that's written down in just this piece of paper or this book. And they have like a box usually where they keep all the money. And it's really cute. They have like 3 locks or 1 lock and 3 keys. And so like the 3 main people, let's say that's like their multi-sig wallet. And then they usually vote on what to do with that money. And like one of the chamas I'm in, we kind of do investments every round. So we vote, and it's always just like a very basic voting, like manual voting, putting your hand up or sending a message. And now with the digital revolution, and we have mobile wallets, we've got WhatsApp, everything is kind of moving towards a very digital way. But there's still like a big issue in these governance structures, which is there's no anonymity in voting, which can kind of cause social tensions because all of these are kind of trust-based systems. So the idea of the chama and the DAO are like so in sync. And I just found it really, really interesting because I've met so many chamas in my let's say the last 5 years doing work in kind of agriculture and developmental agriculture that are all working in really good climate smart agriculture or other nature-based restorative practices. And the one thing that was lacking for them was obviously there's no like financing other than what they're collecting, because there was no like formal records of the amount of money that they're collecting. And this is a very big industry in Kenya. It's valued at like about 3 billion Kenya shillings, which is still a lot of money for an informal sector. And mind you, this is only what they've recorded. I bet you that number is like 3-fold or 4-fold. So I still see that this whole sector is kind of in the dark because this data, this very valuable data about one, the natural restoration that they're doing, and also 2, kind of the amount of money that they're actually collecting, and the fact that most of these are also female-led and female-run. So all this data is not there. Like we have maybe M-Pesa statements, which is our digital wallet that can tell you the amount of transactions, but nobody knows that these are these groups that are self-governed, that are doing all this work. And what we're trying to do with Chama DAO is how do we get these chamas? How do we encourage them to kind of become a DAO? How do we introduce them to DAO tooling and show them that these governance structures exist and they can have these informal structures, but still use the tools that exist to kind of formalize and have proper governance, but also create a body of data that can tell the story of the work that they're doing, and then create that so that they can sort of open themselves up to climate financing. Because at the end of the day, these are the people on the front lines. These are the people working. These are the people who are also affected by every drought. So they should be given the climate financing, but nobody wants to touch them. The IMF, the World Bank, all the other things that are coming in, all the other grants that are coming in will never ever give money to them because they're informal groups and they have no data. So this is kind of the intersection that we're looking at. Like, how do we look at these indigenous groups? How do we tell their story? How do we nurture them and teach them these governance mechanisms, show them the tools that exist, and then sort of bring the two together. So what we're trying to raise for the Gitcoin round is we're trying to get enough money so that we can do a research study, because I think it would be very it would be really, really wrong of us to just kind of bring this technology to them at first. But what we want to do is just kind of highlight the work that they're doing, highlight the data that's been collected, the importance of the data, and tell the story of these groups for all these many, many years, and then get all of that together and sort of see how a successful Chama could look like, what it would be able to do. And then if we have a good pilot, then we can further fundraise and actually create the tooling that could be necessary to sort of scale this at a level that's even beyond Kenya. And I'll pause there in case you have any questions before I talk the whole 1 hour.
No, just go off. No, I think that's beautifully articulated. A lot of things that sort of stand up to me, and I think they touch on the approach of Regen Foundation more broadly, and honestly the Regen Network more broadly too. So I think there's one of the reasons that the Chama DAO project is so compelling to me and a lot of other people is that it reveals a lot of the underlying beliefs and values that we see regenerative economics having in a very close applied sort of implementation scale project. It's not abstract, it's not a hypothetical or theoretical, but very much like in this particulars. And one of them that stands out to me that I'm excited about is we could think of DAOs as traditionally as sort of like online internet native communities that use internet native money, like blockchain-based digital currencies, to hold resources together and to do governance and vote to carry out decision-making processes. And one of the big revelations for me in the last couple of years, and I think Chama DAO beautifully articulates, is that this idea around groups coordinating with resources and democratically voting on their use is not an online native concept, and it's not a blockchain exclusive concept. Lots of other versions of the economy that would be considered informal or outside of an extraction market-based economy have been experimenting with these models of co-ownership and co-governance for a long time, and that these are DAOs too, and that DAOs are a continuation and an evolution of this process that didn't start with being on chain. It didn't even start with the internet or like Discord or group chats. And that part of the work that regenerative economics and ReFi more broadly has to do is understand that there's this wealth of existing social organizations and like processes of making decisions around money that have been overlooked, like basically disrespected or not even seen whatsoever, that could come to the forefront. And so I'm going to ask you a question, and you can answer the question, or you can tell us more about the sort of what's exciting to you about the details of this. But one of the there's a lot of challenges that happen here, and some of them have to do with identity, like how do you prove who's who in the Chama? There's also the question of like how do people know how to vote? Like what is the interface or the UI UX challenge? A lot of it has to do with like internet accessibility and infrastructural questions. So the analog version, in concept, the analog and the blockchain native version are extremely analogous to each other, but there's a bunch of hurdles that happen. And so I'm curious if you can like tease out, Shaila, what makes this difficult. In concept, they're very close, but in execution, there's quite a number of challenges. I just mentioned a few. So you want to say a bit about that?
Yeah, for sure. So one thing that actually excites me about this entire thing is it's the embodiment of ecofeminist financing. the fact that it was created by women, and it's this very slow process that requires a lot of patience, because these women were meeting together and contributing really small amounts. So it's there's a lot of trust also in these systems, and um, they're all kind of just related based on who knows who, and kind of that's how they kind of come together. So one of the challenges obviously would be, how do you scale this, how do you open this out to other people, when traditionally it's always been just me and my village, me and the people who are really close to me, and that's the difference between the chama and the dao at the end of the day. I like the fact that also, the rules are so fluid, in that one week maybe someone hasn't had enough money to contribute, or enough time to contribute, and that was kind of okay. There'd be fines, and it would like really different. It would really change based on the trauma that you're in. And some of the issues that you were talking about, like in internet and infrastructure, don't really exist in Kenya, because we are properly connected, and thanks to Safaricom and Vodacom, we now have internet in even the most remote of places, and now there's like these cheap Chinese phones where, for like $20 somebody can have a smartphone with all the apps on it. So in terms of internet usage, I've found that many indigenous and local communities are very much on the internet now, and they're using like mobile wallets. So like when I'm trying to explain this concept to some of the chamas that I've been meeting, I'm actually quite surprised that they always put that relation and say, so my wallet would just be kind of like an M-Pesa wallet. So because of that precedent, I'm finding it a lot easier to kind of get them to understand it. But again, the biggest issue is the language. Like, the Web3 speak is not very friendly to non-English speakers, and that's one of the things that we're trying to tackle as well, because we're trying to.
I mean, it's kind of not. It's not very friendly to like native English speakers too, honestly.
Yeah, right. And that's kind of the Web3 encyclopedia project that we're engaging on as well. It's not just for local communities, but it's actually for, let's say, your grandma. How do you explain to your grandma what we do? And we even had a Twitter space on this. So for me, the biggest thing is the language, because I find that some of these groups in regeneration, they don't really understand it when you explain it to them in words, but it would be more about like song or analogy, or like narration, stories, and just to bring that point about stories and song, in my tribe, the Kikuyu, there's actually different songs that the children are taught at different stages of their life, based on the work that they're supposed to do. So if you're like a really little kid, you're taught about weeds, and the song is about weeds and weeding, and then when you get like to another rika, we call it, you get taught about sowing the seeds, and then it gets to like when you're like 13 or 14, you're the one who now teaches all the different songs, and that's the connection that's also missing in our world right now. And I feel like with Trauma DAO, these DAOs could be the owners of that data, not just data in the hard data of the statistics of the financials and the regeneration they're doing based on the number of trees they're planting, but also on the indigenous stories and cultures that existed. And if we can document that and imagine amplify this and use the science and the MRV technologies to show that yes, these stories and these songs have actually been used for centuries and have been effectively working, then maybe we can even change the narrative about having that, and make people understand the importance of that. So I see Chama DAO as not just this financial instrument and opening them up to Web3 and opening them up to climate financing, but also as this record of data, of an indigenous, of culture, of stories, and of spirituality that is kind of being lost as well in the process. So in terms of other kinds of barriers, I would find would just be, obviously the Web3 space is dominated by this whole crypto speak, so I'm trying to kind of separate the two and make them understand that the DAO is is sort of separate, and the infrastructure that is Web3 is separate from what you hear and what you know. So obviously it's like bridging that gap, and I'm hoping that with the Web3 encyclopedia and the next step, which is also going to be a DAO toolkit, which is specifically for land stewards in language that they understand, like using local language and local linguistics as well, because language is really, really important, and kind of tying that in through story, through song, so that it's also owned by the local communities. And obviously a big challenge is getting all this stuff together. It's obviously going to take a lot of time, but like I said, we start with the research and we go from there. We're crowdsourcing a lot of information, and if anyone wants to contribute to the Web3 encyclopedia, I'm going to post a link, and maybe we can retweet it and people can contribute it. We really need a lot of contributions for people. So yeah.
If I can just jump in, I mean, I think that what you said demonstrates, I think this is the future, and I think it kind of demonstrates where a lot of the real applied on the ground level of regenerative economics or regenerative finance are going. And so I'm going to plug that this is the kind of work that the Regen Foundation supports and incubates. And for those who aren't familiar, through our project, The Endowment, we're exploring how DAO protocols, tools, and social practices can support or be informed by existing examples of regenerative culture and regenerative economics more broadly, and regenerative like agriculture too. So the Shama DAO is a really beautiful example of this. And I think you make a great point when we talk about DAOs not just being group chats with a bank account or treasuries that are democratically maintained, but they're actual ways of keeping much more than that. That they're a way of keeping a sense of identity, a sense of storytelling that connects through a long history, a long tale, and that DAOs are a really powerful mechanism for communities to own their own data, to own their own storytelling and their own resources in a way which is transparent, at least internally, to the group that holds those resources, and can be protected. So like DAOs as sort of a commons of identity or a commons of storytelling, I think is really powerful. And the larger efforts in 2023 within the foundation is to really sync with on the ground communities, dedicated communities around regeneration that are already doing this work, that are in the weeds on the details of how it actually plays out in social life and economic life, and how they can be supported by DAOs and DAO tooling, but maybe more importantly, like how DAO tooling can learn from them, that the tools reciprocally are informed by what these practices have been doing for a long time, and that it runs both ways. We don't bring decentralization technology to Chamas any more than we bring Chamas to the larger world of blockchain and decentralization technology, so that it's mutual learning. I guess we could go on this for a long time because I think this is a brilliant idea, but I'll pause and say if anyone has questions or if you want to pivot over to another topic, I'm happy to keep going, or just sort of kick the ball back out to the broader group if anyone has questions.
I also just wanted to add before maybe we move to that in terms of governance and broader governance, like imagine having these records that these chamas can then show that, no, look, you can't build that dam in that area because we, the local community, has been taking care of it for these many years and have fundraised this much and have done, like, it's just a legitimizing tool. And that's a big issue here. There's so many people in Kenya who every day lose their land or lose their rights to the land because of some government project or some railway that's being built. And it's because they don't have the records to prove, and they don't have the legitimacy to prove that they are even an association, because they won't even be able to get a bank account. And yet there's so many workings, there's so much that's happening in the process. So Austin, I like what you said. Like, we can learn a lot from chamas. Chamas have been doing this for years with no technology, and they've rallied as groups, and a lot of social protection mechanisms. A lot of people have gone to school because of these things. So I think it's going to be a learning process, and we're really hoping that the research will not only open them up to this tooling that can be built by literally anyone who's interested in it, but also for the DAO communities to learn that this is not the best thing that you just created, but this is something that has happened for years, and not just in Africa. It's happened in other countries as well, and it's been happening. And what are the lessons learned? What can we do better?
Right on. Well, thank you, Austin and Shayla, for the really just fascinating. I'd read about Chamas and some of the work that you had all been putting out in even the last Gitcoin round, but it's really nice to get such a beautiful illustration painted in my head. So thank you so much. And just a reminder,
yeah, and donate to our Gitcoin round.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Reminder: the Gitcoin round is live. You can look up Regen Foundation. Your funding, again, even if you only have $1 or $2, gets multiplied many times over with quadratic funding, and it's about the number of folks donating, not necessarily the amount donated during each donation. So please make sure check out Regen Foundation. Obviously, they're doing outstanding work, critical part and cornerstone of the regen ecosystem, really bringing, often I think help us supporting the voices that are not being represented so often in Web3 and in blockchain, and bringing their knowledge to us and sharing more about the potentials of this tech stack with those communities. So exciting work. Thank you so much both for joining us. Okay, so why don't we make a pivot here? And I see, again, there's some requested speakers. So Ed and Jan, stand by. I want to make sure that we have a chance for Ryan with Regen Network Development is going to share a little bit more about the latest of what's happening with Regen Ledger, our blockchain, a recent upgrade to 5.0. And Ryan, you want to share a little bit some of the highlights of what does that mean for us? What's new? What's fresh, and what's on the horizon?
Yeah, thanks, Dave. I first want to just reiterate the excitement around the work that's being done by Regen Foundation, and the intersection in kind of figuring out where the tooling meets the actual real world organizations, community governed groups, and is something that's really like driving a lot of my inspiration in what attracted me to Regen Network in general when I joined back a couple years ago. And actually 10 years ago, when I was in college, I filmed a documentary on how microfinance was being used in impoverished communities. And I know like the disconnect is pretty clear at the moment to me, because I'm just like buried in the technology, but that's always been like a driving force to me. And the Chama groups is kind of reminding me a lot of like my initial inspiration. So I'm really moved by the conversation that took place just before. And I'm going to pivot a little bit and dive more into the technical side now, but hopefully we can start kind of seeing some connections between the two in terms of the tooling meeting the real world use cases. So yeah, to start off, Regen Ledger 5.0 was released last week. As soon as we got back from our holiday break, we put out the official release, and we upgraded to Regen 5.0 at the beginning of this week. And that was a successful upgrade. And as I mentioned in the beginning, like very grateful for our community, for all the support, and the validators for having a smooth upgrade. And so what Regen Ledger 5.0 includes is a lot of tooling around governance. And two in particular, it updates to the Cosmos SDK version 0.46, which gives us the group module, which is a module that was originally developed within the Regen Ledger repository, and then it was moved over to the Cosmos SDK and is now maintained by the core Cosmos SDK developers. And it also gives us an updated Gov module. And so I'll talk a little bit about the features of each of those. And then, yeah. But before diving into those, I think those are the ones I'm going to focus on. It also provides interchain accounts. So we've updated the latest version of IBC. So people familiar in the Cosmos ecosystem, basically this allows you to call messages cross chains, like on other blockchains in the Cosmos ecosystem that have the ICA module enabled. So that is not enabled by default after the upgrade. We set it to not being enabled by default, so it will require a governance proposal to enable the host and controller modules that allow for this communication to take place, as well as the messages that are allowed to be called on Regen Ledger from another blockchain. And then the last one is like relayer incentivization. Along with the IBC updates, we also added the IBC fee middleware to our IBC modules, which enables the ability to tip relayers essentially at this stage. It's not a requirement or anything, but for cross-chain message execution, there is now a fee middleware that works alongside the IBC calls that allows for the sender to essentially tip the relayer for providing the service of relaying the message. So I'm going to go into the group module and the governance module updates. The group module in particular, this is like really exciting, especially in relation to kind of like the discussion that just took place. Like it is the first step in towards like what governance might look like and what DAO structures and frameworks might look like that would relate to real world use cases. And essentially what the group module enables is it's kind of like a more advanced multi-sig. So essentially you can create a group, and the group can have multiple decision policies, or it could have a single decision policy. And a decision policy has an address associated with it. And so that's actually the address or addresses of a group account. And basically with each decision policy, you can decide on what the parameters are for proposals submitted with that decision policy, what would enable it to pass. So basically there's two default or included out of the box decision policies. One is like a threshold decision policy. The other one is a percentage decision policy. And the threshold decision policy is based off of weights. So when you add a member to a group, you can assign them a weight. It could be any integer essentially, but if the weight of, like, say you have 3 members in your group and each of them have a weight of 1, you can set a decision policy with a threshold of 2. And that would require 2 out of 3 of those people to essentially allow for the proposal to pass. And once the threshold's met, the proposal passes. And versus a percentage, it's not based off of weight, but rather based on the percentage of yes votes or no votes or no with veto or abstain within the whole group. So threshold decision policies are specific to weights that are assigned to members of the group. And then percentage decision policies are not associated with weights. And those are kind of the 2 different frameworks you can use to create a decision policy at the moment with the group module. And this basically allows for any account, kind of like stepping back from a high level, like what was discussed in relation to the Chama as well, is like the managing of funds. So this is the democratic kind of approach or whatever kind of structure that you want to implement through the decision policies. But it is like the first and initial use case is basically like, okay, if you want to pool together resources and funds as a group, then you have the ability to manage those funds, and the distribution of those funds and how those funds are handled is determined based off a decision policy, where someone basically can submit a proposal to the group following a certain decision policy or associated with a certain decision policy that would either transfer funds or redelegate funds to a validator, or withdraw rewards and put it into a treasury account. There's a lot of opportunities and exploration is kind of one thing that we're leaning into now is less in terms of like technical development and more in terms of focus on like, okay, what are the frameworks and what are the different functions that might relate to entities on Regen Ledger, and like specifically like what does a group look like for a project? What does a group look like for a credit class? What does a group look like for the registry? And there's a lot of different approaches that you could take, and so we're kind of exploring what that might look like in each different situation, and speaking with our project developers, the projects that are bringing credits to Regen Ledger, and kind of trying to better understand what their needs are. So the group module it's like kind of open call right now, just like in terms of like there's a lot of opportunity there to explore and experiment with different governance structures and like what kind of functionality like a DAO might have existing on Regen, and even in relation to the interchain accounts update as well, it's like the ability to have that DAO be cross-chain and operate and execute messages on other Cosmos chains as well. So I'm very excited for the group module and the opportunities that it opens up. And then a little bit about the governance module. If I'm
Yeah, please carry on. I have some questions, but go ahead.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, I'm just there's a lot to unpack, so I didn't really know where to start. But yeah, governance module. Basically, this update. The governance proposals are now like arbitrary messages. So basically, the government like previously like an updating of a param in like terms of like a token wide, network wide vote would update a single parameter, and basically that parameter is a specific kind of object in state. But now the governance module update allows for anyone to execute. For anyone to submit a proposal for the gov module to execute any sort of message. And along with like the authorization module, this enables someone to submit a proposal for the gov module to authorize another account to execute what would normally be like a parameter change proposal. So there's none of this is like implemented at the moment, but there's a lot of opportunities and things to think about in terms of whether, like, for example, a science community, like whether they should actually have the ability to add credit types rather than having a network-wide vote by token holders that might not necessarily have the research and the research background and understanding of what a new credit type would entail and like what the parameters of that credit type would be. So yeah, I can go into more detail on either of those, and I'm gonna pause there in terms of letting some questions arise, or we can move forward with other discussions.
I've got a couple of questions, and obviously happy to take other questions as well, or if you want to put them in the chat. So just with groups in particular, obviously it's a pretty big advancement. I know it definitely strikes at the heart of being more agile in democratic decision making around what happens in the Regen ecosystem. Where would this take place at the moment? Like, or is that is there a front end, or is that a to be designed front end? And kind of what's that going to look like? So and then I'm thinking to some degree, obviously we're on the marketing comm side. What's the level of accessibility and to whom and when?
Yeah, that's a great and very important question. Right now, at the very moment, there's not a user interface for the group module. And one of the challenges with this is like there is so much flexibility in different approaches that you could take. And so like a custom interface in a lot of ways would make the most sense. But that being said, the Regen Network development team is building a kind of generic group interface that would allow for people to manage their groups, basically create a group, manage members, submit proposals, create decision policies, update all of the decision policies or group members. So basically it would be like a very generic one. So like it might be difficult or challenging for someone that has like a particular use, for example, like a trauma, or for example, like a CS DAO or something, like if they have a particular focus in terms of what kind of functionality the group is executing, in a lot of ways, like a more custom user interface would make sense. But there is going to be a more generic user interface that will be user friendly, but it's going to be a little bit probably leaning on the side of like catering to like Web3 audience and users. But yeah, I mean, like that's something that I'm very much interested in working with other projects on and exploring, especially in relation to kind of setting up what that would look like for their projects if that group existed on Regen Ledger. And I've actually started kind of like a side project exploration of like what an interface might look like with a particular set of like decision policies associated with specific functionality, and like this is something that we're exploring, and I'm very interested in other projects that have ideas around use cases and things like that, and kind of helping them develop what or design what a user interface would look like for their needs, because it's easy to add a bunch of complexity, and like that's one of the things that we want to avoid, like especially if this group doesn't need the functionality of treasury management. Maybe there's like a simple like voting application that someone wants to build. There's maybe there's a complex group that wants to manage like eco credit assets and have those assets be transferable across chains and moved across chains, and the group is managing the execution of those messages, and that's like a much more complex view of what that might look like. So I think in a lot of ways that we're kind of at this point where it's like the tools are available, and there's a real big opportunity now to kind of explore what that would look like. And taking, for example, real world use cases, I think is something that is worth like emphasizing here, in terms of like not trying to develop out some overly complicated Web3 specific user interface or tool, but meeting these existing governance bodies where they're at currently, and kind of developing and catering the group module as like the underlying tool to support their needs.
Great. And thank you, Will. You've been quite patient. Will, did you have a question about any of the Regen Ledger 5.0 update?
A comment. He just what he was saying says really, it sounds really cool. And so Oglala Life, which I'm a part of, like the idea is crowdfund an endowment that goes for a certain application, you know, like regenerate watersheds and wetlands in a certain area. And I think that is a real world application that, anyway, that's just what comes to mind. So yeah, it sounds really useful, although I don't know how to go about designing this custom interface.
Yeah, I mean there is a little bit of a development hurdle there, and I think one thing to look out for is potentially the UI that will be a more generic UI that might not be specific to your project's needs, but also a little bit of work, like I guess the encyclopedia or Wikipedia that the foundation's working on. I've also been collaborating with someone on our registry team in terms of what that would look like, what different frameworks might look like for project developers versus like credit classes, and kind of trying to build out some ideas around templates around like what different ways of organizing and using the group module would look like. So yeah, I'm hoping to get past the complexity, and I think the first step would just really just be getting familiar with what functionality is available and thinking about like what structure governance structure you would want, like how many members do you have, are there certain decision policies that are associated with specific actions, or do you just have one single decision policy that all members that determines the outcome of all actions of the group. So I'd be happy to think and talk through any of those ideas. But yeah, there is a little bit of a hurdle in terms of like a UI. There's not a one size fits all solution for a UI for the group module.
Wonderful. Thank you. Good question, Will. Thank you for the response. Austin, you had a question?
Yeah, I mean, this is super exciting. And I think this was a great pairing that we ended up talking about the evolution of the groups and the front end of groups and customizing it after talking about Chamas. So always nice to see that there's actually, from the technical side and the applied side, like a lot of overlap. Ryan, your last comment being like, well, there shouldn't be one single UI. It's a complex thing. It's like, yes, exactly. I feel like it's really exciting to think about the customization of it and how to proliferate that customization. Like pluralism is the goal, and there's going to be so many biases baked into whatever it is built that it will work for some and not for all. And I'm curious if it would be helpful, because like managing a treasury, managing the contents of a wallet, and doing things with it is one is a very clear set of like sort of financial protocols that can be governed via groups. And I'm curious how we could play with groups to do decisions that might not necessarily be like programmatically enforceable, like now code is law, now it's happening, but that like a Slack or the Discord could play around with groups to make the decision around if they want to go to the grocery store on Friday or Saturday, or simple decisions that just get it kind of in the field. Because I feel like oftentimes its application to how to receive and transmit from a treasury or a wallet is a stumbling block for different groups to try the tools out, because they're like, well, seems kind of limited. So I would be interested in trying to play with the simple interface that, well, maybe ultimately it was a really kind of proof of concept exercise, but groups could just try to make decisions about any number of arbitrary things that we could then see the result. And whether or not that was, provable, or we could ensure that it happened, is maybe less important than just getting it out in the wild and trying to experiment with applications that are not only around resource application.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And I mean, submitting a proposal in a group doesn't require a SDK message or like blockchain message to be attached to it. You can submit any arbitrary proposal without any messages attached to it that won't perform any sort of action on chain, other than like demonstrating how the outcome of the voting process. So yeah, I think you're spot on in terms of what it might look like for an initial approach or initial like experimentation with the group module. If you're looking to implement in some ways, like being able to submit a proposal and determining what the decision policy of the proposal is, whether it's percentages or a threshold, and just doing things that are not necessarily resource management. So
awesome. Jan, I see you have your hand up. You have a question?
Thank you. Hi. I just wanted to make sure, Dave, that we connect Captain Obvious work, and I'm sorry, I don't know if I got your name in the beginning. Naomi, was that right? Shayla. Oh, I was completely off. So to the social working group under BXC, because it's about language and messaging. So Naomi, Sheila, if you see a message from me, just wanted to give you a heads up. Is that okay?
Yeah. Thanks for flagging that. It's a good flag.
And I have a very quick anecdote, because in 2015, that's ages ago in crypto, I was part of a group that proposed using tontines, which is in concept similar, an informal structure in Africa to shamas, to record the transactions and build credit history. So I'm super happy to see these concepts still being pursued, and the tools are getting better, and that is all fantastic.
Thanks for the share. Ed, you've been patient. You have a question, and then Will, and then I'll tie us up.
Yes, thanks. Yeah, I think Shyla and Ryan even tied together a bit, bring up some good points that I've been seeing recently. Regenerative way that we look at it in agriculture has the 5 principles of soil health plus context. And I think that's what the global movement is having a hard time understanding, that farmers have always worked together in their area. They've done it in different ways, different names of what they name it, but they've always been really good at working together. And that seems to be just missed in the bigger picture, in the same way that recently, and I've noticed it, even I noticed it at COP, I noticed it at the Biodiversity Summit, and now at the WEF, there's lots of regenerative has become really popular as a term, but it seems like nobody understands where it came from, what it means, what it connects. I've read a lot of posts recently by the big global support ag groups and stuff saying that, we have regenerative agriculture, but it has no definition. We don't know how it works. We need to put in the money to build the framework and everything. And yet that's already pretty much been done. They're just not connecting with the people that created it and developed it over the years, both the farmers and the scientists that they work with. And because most of the scientists tend to be independent, so they can't connect to them through normal institutions. So I think, the whole regen concept, we're going to have to try to shore up a bit before it gets changed too much. And so that people really understand what's at the root of it, whether it be in agriculture or now I heard from WEF the other day, regenerative organizations. What that means, I don't know, but it seems like regenerative is everywhere now. But we're going to have to try to get the right ideas out to people and encourage people to connect with the people that have really worked and developed it over the years. So thank you.
Well said, Ed. Will, last comment, and then I'll tie us up for the day.
Yeah, there's a topic that I guess we didn't get to, and that's cool because I really enjoyed the conversation. The Cosmos Zero campaign is meant to clean up our own mess, like the POS blockchains that we use are very efficient, but there's still carbon emissions footprint. And so Cosmos Zero is a way for blockchains to offset that. And there's a discussion that's been started in the Stargaze community about how best to do that. And I would encourage y'all to get involved. And it's not just Stargaze, but that discussion is one that I'm a part of. And there's a few questions that need to be considered. And so, like, for example, like if a protocol wants to offset its emissions footprint, do they need to do that for the active validator set, or do they need to do that for the extraneous ones, like the ones beyond the active validator set? And I don't know that answer. Yeah, we have options in terms of like the NCT and the city forest credits too. And so I would just encourage people to pay attention and get involved in that discussion, because like the way protocols have been offsetting now is anyway, we just need to get more sophisticated about cleaning up our own mess, because we can't say that we're refi if we can't even do that. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks. Well, appreciate that. That was going to be my last comment, just to kind of pull us together topically on closing out with Cosmos Zero. I just want to give you a quick update. The campaigns are very, very alive, very active. It's actually, I think as we shared a little bit last week, there has been some blowback we've had to deal with. Just some communities who have either small community pools, or their tokens have been especially suffered a fair amount of depreciation, or token price has gone down quite a bit, have hesitated to move forward, and so there's been some really interesting learning lessons. One, as always, this is Cosmos. All chains are independent. They have their own unique needs and voices. So a lot of respect for each chain's ability to set its own course. As just a general rule. But yeah, so the ones that really recently failed were around Agoric, Akash, and Juno. Although I know at least two of those are interested in bringing the proposal back when the markets have recovered a little bit. We also have had a passage recently of over at Gravity Bridge. So big shout out to the Gravity Bridge community who passed that proposal. And, you know, an interesting thing being considered there is for obvious reasons, it is, you know, Gravity's token is, you know, is not, you know, is, you know, below a cent or in that range. And so there's, you know, concern around price pressure. We've been talking with them at Loa Labs as the proposer of the proposal that passed, as well as to the R&D team, where we're going to be looking at R&D ending up staking the tokens from the sale of that NCT in good faith, and keeping, you know, becoming a participant in that network, helping secure the network, and also not putting downward pressure on the token itself, while at the same time creating space for Gravity Bridge to become carbon neutral with the retirement of NCT that will go online here. I think we're close to a week out from a bridge being live between Polygon and Regen Network, which will then allow for some of these proposals that have passed to be fully executed with the purchase and retirement of NCT and the underlying credits that make up those baskets. So there are also active discussions, as Will mentioned, over in Stargaze. Injective is actively discussing, and we expect that there'll be some more coming online as well, which we are optimistic for passage. But it has been, you know, it's been a really good learning time for us. You know, obviously down markets make everything a little bit tougher, but just you know, having the community dialogues across multiple chains at the same time around a complex topic that, you know, as I think we've learned over and over again, that carbon markets, carbon credits are not easily understood. They are opaque. They have experienced a fair amount of bad press for quite some time, and for oftentimes for good reason. And I think as we, as a regen community, continue to step forward using the technology stack, the philosophy and principles of regeneration to develop and originate high integrity ecological credits and develop a market to support those, I think it just re-emphasizes the need to do that, and to, you know, that we're in a long game here of really bringing awareness and also you know, just a level of integrity to ecological assets that I think have suffered from a reputational damage for a number of years, that I'm really excited for the regen community to help turn the tide on that. So with all that said, I want to thank everyone for being here today. It is Thursday. It is 9:01 a.m. Pacific time, and really grateful to spend the morning with you. Appreciate all of your work and very grateful. Just a reminder, make sure you donate to the Gitcoin campaign for Regen Foundation. I would also encourage you to check out Loa Labs Refi by South campaign, you know, which is run by our colleague Pranav. Very exciting campaign to help to support and activate around some of the climate movement building in the global South. And we will see you a week from today. And report back on some other exciting news related to the launch of the Blockchain Times Climate Leadership Network, what happened in Davos, and get updates across the ecosystem. So with all that said, thank you, everybody. Have a great rest of your week. Very grateful for all of you. Be well.
Thanks, everyone. Great convo.
Yeah, thank you all.